generative grammar. Now the ninth video. Ninth video. What are you eating? That can be said. What are you eating? The sentence, the grammatical sentence in English would be what are you eating? But the grammatical sentence in Hindi can be तुम क्या खा रहे हो और क्या खा रहे हो. In the example of Hindi, we can delete this part of the sentence and it still looks very grammatical because we can what do you say? We can retrieve that knowledge, that word or that part of the sentence. We can retrieve it, but in English you cannot do that. You have to say what are eating. You can't say that what are eating. You have to say what are you eating. That would make an English grammatical question. A grammatical question in the English language. English questions do not allow for subject to be retrievable. Once you delete this, it becomes ungrammatical. But in Hindi, questions are allowed. Hindi question allows for the subject to be covert as in which cannot be seen physically, which does not have its presence in the spoken language and yet be grammatical. It allows for the subject to be retrievable. Hindi language, kya kha rahe ho, and you need to use tum kya kha rahe ho to make this explicit, but you don't need this tum. You can say kya kha rahe ho and it would still remain and continue to be a grammatical sentence. The whole phenomenon of drop in subject is dependent on rich morphology, rich projections, and rich agreement features of a language. That's how you can retrieve data, and you can drop them in sentences. You can drop them, you can retrieve them. And why can you do that? It is because they have a rich morphological system, rich agreement features. As in here you can see that going, a word like going would mean ja rahe ho, right? So the ing form makes the meaning of a continuous aspect or a progressive aspect, which is an ongoing process, ja rahe ho, and then rahe ho explicitly. Hindi has a word for it, so more words, while English just has an addition, not a word. Hindi has a word for it. It has a richer morphology. More words makes richer morphology. But in English, it is just an addition to the verb. So languages that have more words are richer as they look lavish. Beautiful coloring in here. Alright. So let's discuss a sentence. So you in English can be translated to words like आप और तुम or tu in the Hindi language. Let's say we can have a sentence here, तुम जा रहे हो. We can also say आप जा रहे हो. It would mean the same thing. आप जा रहे हो, right? तू जा रहा है. So here this arrow shows a hierarchy of how words are used. आप जा रहे हैं, आप जा रहे हैं can be a sentence. Like if you take it to equivalence, that can be used. But तुम जा रहे हैं cannot be used because you see this hierarchy of going upwards is not allowed. It can come downwards, आप जा रहे हो. It cannot go upwards as in तुम जा रहे हैं. You can say आप जा रहे हैं, right? Okay, that's about the hierarchy. So all I want to say is that English has not as rich in morphology or agreement features or morphological features as some languages like Hindi or Indian languages majorly. Chinese also has a richer morphological system where subject can be retrieved. It's retrievable. Intransitive verb has no object. Transitive verb has one object. Ditransitive verb has two objects. Examples of intransitive verb. John was sleeping. Bill was going home. Bill was going home. Mary was coming from school. You can say Mary was coming. It doesn't need this object to make it a grammatical sentence. You can say Mary was coming. Chris was sitting in the chair. So you don't need to use this object. You can say Chris was sitting, and that would be a grammatical sentence. Nancy was dancing. It doesn't need an object, neither would it take one. So that's intransitive verbs: going, coming, sitting, dancing, sleeping. Those are intransitive verbs. But now we look at transitive verbs that take one object as a complement, not as an adjunct, as a complement. Bob was eating pizza. So what was he eating? He was eating pizza, right? Chris was reading a novel. What was he reading? He was reading a novel. It would take an object. This verb, reading, a verb like reading, will take an object. Eating would also take an object. What was he eating? Lisa was writing a letter. What was she writing? She was writing a letter. Tony gave an Apple Pencil to Lisa. So he gave. Now this verb will take first object, second object. No. This is the first one. He gave it directly to Lisa. And what did he give will be the second object, the Apple Pencil. She was teaching Japanese English. So this would translate or elaborate to: she was teaching Japanese people English language. She was teaching English language to Japanese people. That's what it means. This sentence means So, okay, so the first object here would be Japanese, because she was teaching to the Japanese people, and she was teaching what? She was teaching English. Okay.
Now, these are just examples of what I have done. I have still not told you how do I know whether a verb requires an object or not. You can say, because we are not native speakers of English, you need to check this thing only with a native speaker. Because we are not native speakers of English, a sentence like Bob was eating, to us, it sounds alright. Right? This is why we don't depend on the judgment about a sentence who is not a native speaker. Okay? We can say Chris was reading. It's fine. Lisa was writing. That's also fine. Now, I am not trying to say our English is bad. I'm also not trying to say we don't understand how language works. The reason why in our English these sentences are good without their objects is because of this reason again.
The first language has the knowledge of the first language has dramatic consequence on the learning or teaching of the second language. That's the reason behind it.
In languages, we not only drop subjects, but we can also drop objects. In our languages, we can drop objects in the context.
So we could say he's reading a novel, and we can say he's reading, and that in Hindi would be "वो पढ़ रहा है." That's grammatical. But in English, we need to add a complement with it.
Okay, so if we have a verb khana, which is a transitive verb, then we can drop objects, right? Because the objects are retrievable from the context. Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Marathi, Gujarati allows dropping of objects also. If a sentence without object in English is good to us, that is the influence of our native languages on English, where English does not allow dropping of objects. So if you are asking a speaker of English from India, these sentences are good to them. If you ask these sentences to a native speaker of English, they won't be able to tell you. I'm sorry, they will be able to tell you that this sentence is incomplete. When you say Bob was eating, the sentence is incomplete. They will still be waiting for the object. Bob was eating. What did he eat? Okay? And the sentence sounds incomplete because of the lack of object. Alright? Now, to wind it up, and we'll discuss this thing very briefly when we meet next time with the other topics. We only need to ask a question. We only need to question the verb with what. If you can question the verb with what, and you have a legitimate question, then you will get an answer too. If the question is not legitimate, then there is no question of getting an answer. As long as you can question the verb, keep in mind, only with what. Question the verb with what, then that's a transitive verb. I can question eat with what or not. Eat, you don't even need to get a complete sentence. What did you eat? You can simply say eat what. Right? Does this sound like a good question? If it's a good question, then you will get an answer to. Eat pizza, eat ice cream. Then we know that this verb is transitive and it will need an object. Okay? Read that a good question? Right what? If you look at intransitive verbs, can we question for the verb sleep with the same question? Sleep what? And this is why I am telling you, please don't use other questions. Where, when, how, none of them. Just what? Sleep what? Go what? Sit what? Dance what? Okay? If the question is not legitimate, there is no possibility of getting an answer, and therefore the verb is an intransitive verb, which in turn means no object. Okay? The question about ditransitive verb is, you still need the same question what? But there is no way to figure out whether the verb is ditransitive. As long as you can figure out it's a transitive verb, that's good enough. Okay? Ditransitive verbs to non-natives, we have to find out specifically. Keep this in mind. I have given you a diagnostic test. This test is not part of either principle or parameter. This is a diagnostic test and is not 100% foolproof. It works only to a great extent. In, let's say, we can say 99% of the cases. Still, 1%